Watch the man in the center, kneeling on that prayer mat. His name is Naji. He just blocked an entire highway with dozens of Muslim activists to pray to Allah. Then, an impossible wind strikes from nowhere, hurling prayer mats across the asphalt like leaves in a storm.
My name is Naji, and I'm 28 years old. On September 6, 2023, I made the worst decision of my life. I led a protest that blocked an entire highway during rush hour so we could pray. I thought I was serving God. I was wrong about everything. I was born into a devout Muslim immigrant family here in America. My parents came to this country with nothing but their faith and their dreams, and they raised me with strict Islamic teachings. Every day started with prayer, every meal began with Bismillah, every decision was filtered through the Quran. My mother wore her hijab with pride, even when people stared at her in grocery stores, even when teenagers shouted slurs at her from passing cars. My father worked 2 jobs to provide for us, and I watched him bow his head and take the disrespect, the discrimination, the casual hatred that came with being visibly Muslim in America. Growing up, I felt caught between 2 worlds. At school I was American, I spoke English without an accent, I understood the pop culture references, I knew how to blend in. But at home, I was something else entirely. I was the son of immigrants, the keeper of traditions, the bridge between the old world and the new. And honestly, I never felt like I fully belonged to either side. The American kids saw me as foreign. The kids at the mosque saw me as too westernized. I existed in this uncomfortable middle space, always trying to prove myself to someone. I watched my mother face discrimination constantly. I saw the way people looked at her hijab, the way store clerks followed her around like she was going to steal something, the way strangers told her to go back to her own country. I saw my father struggle to find acceptance, to be seen as more than just a Muslim, to be recognized for his hard work and his kindness instead of being reduced to his religion. And something inside me hardened. I developed this burning desire to make Islam visible, to make it respected, to force people to see us as we truly were. In college, I found the activist groups. Finally, I was surrounded by people who understood my anger, who shared my frustration, who wanted to do something about it. We started organizing public demonstrations, prayer gatherings in parks, protests at City Hall. At first, it felt righteous. We were standing up for our faith, making our voices heard, demanding the respect we deserved, and I convinced myself that this was what God wanted, that bold, public displays of faith were acts of courage and devotion. But looking back now, I can see how it changed me, how it twisted something good into something dangerous. We started small, sure, but it escalated. The demonstrations became more confrontational, the rhetoric became more aggressive, and my fellow activists became my closest friends, my entire identity wrapped up in the cause. I stopped seeing them as people with different perspectives. I started seeing them as people who shared my anger, who validated my rage, who told me that my extremism was actually righteousness. We fed off each other's anger. We called it passion. We called it faith. We sat in cramped apartments late into the night, planning our next action, convincing each other that we needed to be bolder, louder, more disruptive. And anyone who questioned us, we dismissed them. My parents started expressing concerns about the direction I was heading, but I waved them off as too moderate, too westernized, too willing to accept oppression. Even my own family became the enemy in my mind because they didn't share my zeal. I began viewing non-Muslims with suspicion and outright hostility. Every interaction became a potential confrontation. Every news story about terrorism made me defensive and angry. Every political debate felt personal. And instead of building bridges, I was burning them. Instead of showing people the beauty of Islam, I was showing them aggression and disruption. But I couldn't see it then. I was too deep in it, too surrounded by people who thought exactly like me. The planning sessions became more extreme. Someone would propose an idea, and instead of asking if it was wise or kind or productive, we'd ask, if it was bold enough, if it would make headlines, if it would force people to pay attention. And that's how we arrived at the highway plan. It was late at night, maybe 20 of us crammed into someone's living room. The organizer stood up and proposed it like it was the most brilliant idea in the world. We would block a major interstate during Friday rush hour. We would lay out our prayer mats right there on the asphalt and pray, forcing thousands of people to stop, to see us, to acknowledge our existence. Some people hesitated. I could see it in their faces, the flicker of doubt, the question of whether this was going too far. But I jumped in immediately. I championed the idea enthusiastically, passionately. I said we had to be bold. I said Allah would protect us. I said this would change everything, that people would finally respect us, that this was our moment. And my enthusiasm drowned out their doubts. One by one, they agreed. One by one, they convinced themselves that this was righteous. We chose Interstate 95, one of the busiest highways in the entire region. We planned every detail with military precision. The timing had to be perfect, 5 p.m. on a Friday, right in the heart of rush hour when the maximum number of people would be affected. We gathered supplies, prayer mats, bullhorns, coordinated our logistics, and I volunteered to lead the prayer, to be at the very front, to be the face of this action, because I wanted the glory. I wanted to be the one remembered as brave, as uncompromising, as devoted. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing with excitement. I felt important. I felt chosen. I felt like I was about to do something that mattered, something that would prove my devotion to God, something that would make my life mean something. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything I believed would come crashing down on a highway in front of hundreds of witnesses. September the 6th, 2023. I woke up at dawn for Fajr prayer, and I was more fervent than I'd ever been. I prostrated on my prayer mat, and I begged Allah to make this protest successful, to show His power through us, to vindicate what we were about to do. I asked Him to protect us, to make us bold, to let the whole world see that we would not be silenced. I prayed with tears streaming down my face, convinced that I was about to do something holy. At 3 in the afternoon, I met with the other activists at our designated gathering point near the highway. There were more than 40 of us, all dressed in traditional Islamic clothing, because we wanted maximum visual impact. We wanted people to see us and immediately know what we represented. The men wore thobes and kufis. The women wore full hijabs and abayas. We were making a statement before we even stepped onto that highway. I checked my supplies obsessively. My prayer mat was rolled tight under my arm. The bullhorns were charged and tested. Everyone had their positions memorized. And my heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode out of my chest. I told myself it was righteous adrenaline, that this was how the prophets must have felt before they stood up to oppression. We gathered in a circle and prayed together one last time, reciting verses about standing firm in faith, about not fearing the consequences of righteousness. At 4:55 we started walking toward the highway entrance ramp. The traffic was already heavy, cars moving at 60 miles per hour or faster. It was a perfect late afternoon, the kind of day when everyone's just trying to get home to their families, and we were about to ruin it for thousands of people. But I didn't think about that then. I thought about making a statement. I thought about being remembered. The first vehicles saw us and slammed on their brakes. Horns started blaring immediately, a cacophony of anger and confusion. We spread across all 4 lanes like a human wall, forcing everything behind us to stop. Within seconds, traffic was backing up. Within a minute, it was complete chaos. And we just kept walking forward, deeper onto the highway until we found our spot. I knelt down and unrolled my prayer mat directly on the asphalt. The ground was rough and hot beneath my knees. Around me, dozens of others were doing the same, creating rows of prayer mats blocking every single lane. The sound of horns was deafening now. Hundreds of vehicles trapped behind us, but I tried to block it out. I told myself to focus. to remember why we were doing this. It took less than 2 minutes for us to create a complete standstill. Hundreds of cars trapped, unable to move forward or backward. And I felt powerful. I felt like we were unstoppable, like we were warriors for God, like nothing could touch us. One of the activists stood up with a bullhorn and began the adyan, the call to prayer. His voice echoed across the highway, competing with the horns and the shouting. I prostrated, pressing my forehead against the prayer mat, trying to lose myself in the Arabic words I'd memorized as a child. Around me, dozens of others were doing the same, rows and rows of bodies blocking all lanes of one of the busiest highways in America. But even through the prayer, I could hear everything. The screaming, the cursing, the pleading. People were getting out of their cars now, advancing toward us, their voices raw, with desperation and fury. And in the distance, police sirens were getting closer and closer. I kept my eyes closed. I told myself to focus, to ignore the chaos we were creating, to stay strong in my faith. Between prayer positions, I made the mistake of glancing up, and that's when I saw them, really saw them. There was a mother in a minivan just 20 feet away, pounding on her steering wheel with both fists, and in the back seat I could see her child crying, face red and twisted. There was an elderly man leaning against his car door, an oxygen tank visible in the back seat, his face gray with exhaustion and stress. There was a pregnant woman being helped out of her vehicle by her husband, and even from where I knelt I could see she was in distress, her face contorted with pain. A young father was running between the cars, shouting about his daughter's school emergency, begging us to move, his voice cracking with desperation. And trapped somewhere in the gridlock behind us, I could hear an ambulance, its sirens wailing helplessly, unable to reach whoever needed it. Something cracked inside me right then. Just for a moment I felt it, the weight of what we were doing, the real human cost of our statement. But I pushed it down hard. I squeezed my eyes shut and went back to praying, reciting the words louder, trying to drown out the doubt. The police arrived on foot, unable to drive through our blockade. Officers with megaphones were ordering us to disperse, to clear the highway, warning us of arrest. But we refused to move. We prayed louder, more aggressively. Some of my fellow activists were shouting back at the police, calling this religious persecution, calling this oppression, and I joined them, my voice hoarse from yelling over the noise. Some of the trapped drivers were getting bold now, pushing past the police line, advancing toward us with fury in their eyes. There was shoving, confrontations breaking out on the edges of our group. The tension was reaching a breaking point, and I could feel violence hanging in the air like electricity before a storm. Then one of the drivers broke through completely. It was a mother, and she fell to her knees right in front of me, tears streaming down her face. "My son is sick," she screamed at me. "He needs the hospital. Please, please, I'm begging you, let me through." I looked at her face. I saw genuine terror there. I saw a mother's desperation, raw and real and undeniable. And for just a second, everything I believed wavered. But my friends were watching. The cameras were rolling. This was our moment. So I looked away from her. I told myself she was lying, exaggerating, testing our faith. I told myself that if her son was really that sick, she would have called an ambulance. I made excuses because I couldn't face what I was actually doing. I returned to the prayer position, prostrating myself on that mat one more time. But my hands were shaking now. My heart was pounding for a completely different reason, and somewhere deep inside, beneath all the ideology and the anger and the certainty, a small voice was asking me a question I didn't want to hear. What are you doing? What have you become? I was prostrated on my prayer mat, forehead pressed against the rough fabric, trying desperately to concentrate on the Arabic prayers flowing from my mouth. But my mind was racing, my hands were trembling, and that mother's face kept appearing behind my closed eyelids. Then I felt it. A shift in the atmosphere, subtle at first, but undeniable. The air pressure changed around me and my ears popped slightly, like when you're in an airplane descending too quickly. It felt like the moment right before a thunderstorm hits, that electric tension in the air when everything goes still and quiet. But when I opened my eyes just a crack, the sky above was only partly cloudy. There was no storm coming, at least not the kind I understood. I could feel other protesters shifting uncomfortably around me, sensing the same thing I was sensing. Something was wrong. Something was different. The relentless blaring of car horns that had been our constant soundtrack suddenly seemed to fade into the background, and for just 1 second there was an eerie silence that fell over the entire highway. In that moment of quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I could hear my breath coming too fast, too shallow. Then I heard it. A sound like nothing I had ever heard before in my entire life. It started as a low rushing sound in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. It was directional, focused, moving toward us with purpose, and then the wind hit. It came from the west, sudden and powerful, slamming into my back like a physical force. But this was not a natural breeze. This was concentrated, almost targeted, as if something was aiming it directly at us. Loose papers and debris from the stopped cars began swirling across the asphalt in violent spirals. My kufi was ripped off my head and went tumbling away down the highway. The temperature dropped so fast that goosebumps erupted across my arms despite the warm September afternoon, and the wind hit my back like a hand, like someone was physically shoving me, trying to push me off my prayer mat. I pressed down harder, flattening myself against the mat, trying to keep my position, but I could feel it shifting beneath me. At first it was subtle, just an inch of movement, then 2 inches. The fabric was sliding across the asphalt like it was being pulled by invisible hands. I dug my fingers into the mat, trying to anchor it in place, trying to hold on. Around me I could see other mats beginning to move too, sliding and shifting as the wind intensified. I told myself it was just weather, just a freak gust of wind, just coincidence. But deep down, in a place I did not want to acknowledge, I knew better. I knew this was something else entirely. The wind was growing stronger now, screaming around us. But here is what terrified me most. Other objects on the highway were barely moving. The cars were still. The signs were steady, but our prayer mats were being targeted specifically, violently, as if the wind had a will of its own. My mat suddenly yanked hard to the right and I lost my grip completely. I fell sideways onto the rough asphalt, my hands scraping against the ground, my shoulder hitting hard. Pain shot through my arm, but I barely felt it, because I was too busy watching my prayer mat tumble away from me like a leaf in a hurricane. Around me chaos had erupted. Protesters were scrambling, grabbing desperately at their mats, shouting in confusion and fear. Some mats were tumbling end over end across multiple lanes, cartwheeling away like they weighed nothing. I watched one mat lift completely into the air, rising up and up before flying off the edge of the highway and disappearing from view. The activists were shouting now in Arabic, in English, their voices panicked and shrill. What is happening? Why is this happening? Make it stop. I tried to stand up, tried to chase after my mat, but the wind pushed me back down. It was too strong, too focused, too impossible. I ended up on my hands and knees, watching helplessly as my prayer mat cartwheeled across all 4 lanes and slammed into the concrete barrier on the far side. And still the wind screamed around us, but only around us. The trapped drivers were standing by their cars, watching in complete stunned silence, barely touched by the wind that was tearing our protest apart. Some of the activists were running now, abandoning their mats entirely, fleeing back toward the entrance ramp. Others were frozen in place, staring at the sky as if trying to understand where this was coming from, and I was still on my hands and knees in the middle of the highway, my chest heaving, my hands shaking so violently I could not control them. The wind continued for another 10 seconds that felt like an eternity. 10 seconds of watching everything we had planned, everything we believed in, being literally blown away. And then it stopped. Just like that. As suddenly as it had started, it was over. The wind died completely, leaving absolute silence in its wake except for the distant wail of police sirens. I could not breathe. My chest felt crushed, like someone was standing on my rib cage. My hands were still shaking uncontrollably, and I could not make them stop. I looked around at the total devastation. Prayer mats were scattered across all 4 lanes, some torn and crumpled, some wrapped around guardrails, some simply gone. The protesters were in complete disarray, some sitting on the ground in shock, some standing frozen, some still running away, and I was still on my knees, not in prayer this time, in absolute bone-deep terror. Because I had asked Allah for a sign before we came here, I had prayed that morning for Him to show His power, to vindicate our protest, to prove that we were doing His will. And this is what happened. This impossible, targeted, devastating wind that destroyed our demonstration in less than a minute. What if this was not from Allah at all? The thought hit me like a freight train, and I physically recoiled from it. What if I had been praying to the wrong God? What if everything I believed was a lie? What if that wind was not a test, but an answer, and the answer was stop? I could not process it. My mind was fracturing, trying to hold on to my certainty while everything around me proved that certainty was built on sand. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear into the asphalt and never be seen again. But all I could do was kneel there, gripping my head with both hands, feeling like my skull was going to split open from the pressure. Around me, some activists were trying to rally, trying to salvage the protest. One was screaming that this was a test from Allah, that we needed to stay strong, that we could not let this break our faith. But his voice sounded hollow and desperate even to my shattered mind. And when I looked at the other protesters, I saw the same terror in their eyes that I felt in my chest. We all knew. We all felt it. Something had just happened that should not have been possible, and none of us could explain it away. I was still on my knees on that highway, but this was not prayer. This was shock. This was terror. My hands were gripping the sides of my head so tightly I could feel my fingernails digging into my scalp. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, in every fingertip. I tried to take a breath, but my chest would not expand properly, like something was sitting on my ribcage crushing the air out of my lungs. Around me, the other protesters were in similar states of panic and confusion. Some were crying openly, tears streaming down their faces as they stared at their scattered prayer mats. Some were backing away slowly from the mats like they were suddenly afraid to touch them. Others were just standing frozen, eyes wide and vacant, looking like they had seen something that broke their understanding of reality. And maybe we had. One activist, a man I had known for 2 years, was screaming at the top of his lungs that this was a test from Allah, that we needed to stay strong, that we could not let this break us. But even as he shouted, his voice was cracking with fear and doubt. His hands were shaking just like mine. And when our eyes met for just a second, I saw that he did not believe his own words. He was trying to convince himself more than he was trying to convince us. But I could not move, could not speak, could not do anything except sit there on the rough asphalt with my hands on my head, trying to understand what had just happened. My mind kept replaying it over and over. The impossible wind, the targeted force, the way my prayer mat had been ripped from under me like it was being pulled by invisible hands. And the more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. Then I looked down at my hands, these same hands that minutes ago had been pressed together in prayer, so certain, so confident in my righteousness. Now they were shaking uncontrollably, covered in scrapes from where I had fallen, unable to be still. And I heard something, not with my ears, not an audible voice, but clear as anything I had ever heard in my entire life, a question that seemed to come from somewhere outside of me and inside of me at the same time. "What are you doing?" I looked up from my trembling hands, and that is when I saw her, the mother with the sick child. Traffic was starting to move now, slowly, cautiously, as police began clearing the scattered prayer mats from the lanes. Her minivan was passing right by where I knelt, moving at maybe 5 miles per hour, and through her windshield our eyes met. She was crying, her face was wet with tears, and her expression was a mixture of relief and pain, and something else I could not quite name. Maybe pity, maybe forgiveness, I do not know. But in that moment, looking into her eyes, everything I had believed shattered, just completely came apart like glass hitting concrete. I had convinced myself we were righteous. I had told myself we were serving God, standing up for our faith, making a necessary statement. But we were not righteous. We were cruel. We had blocked this woman from reaching help for her sick child. We had trapped an elderly man with an oxygen tank in the heat. We had delayed an ambulance from reaching someone who needed it. We had disrupted thousands of lives, caused untold suffering, all because we wanted to make a point. That is when everything I had built my identity on began to collapse. And the most terrifying part was not the collapse itself. It was the question that came with it. If I was wrong about this, what else was I wrong about? If blocking a highway to pray was not righteous, was my entire approach to faith wrong? And if my approach was wrong, was my faith itself wrong? The questions spiraled in my mind, each one more frightening than the last, until I thought I might go insane right there on that highway. The police were moving in now, their approach calm but firm and professional. I could see officers walking toward us, dozens of them, prepared for resistance. But there was no resistance left in me. When the officer reached me and asked me to stand, I obeyed like a robot. When he explained that I was under arrest and began reading me my rights, I barely heard the words. My mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying the wind, the mats, the impossibility of it all. The handcuffs clicked around my wrists, and I felt nothing. No anger, no defiance, no sense of martyrdom like I had imagined I would feel. Just emptiness. Just this vast echoing void where my certainty used to be. They loaded us into police vans, me and the other activists, and the ride to the county station was silent. Not the defiant silence of prisoners proud of their cause, the hollow silence of people who had just watched their entire worldview torn apart by an impossible wind. I sat in that van staring out the window at normal traffic resuming on the highway, people going about their lives, heading home to their families, completely unaware. The tut-tut that my entire existence had just been upended on that asphalt. And I thought about the prayer I had said that morning. I had asked Allah to show His power. I had begged Him to vindicate our protest, to prove that we were doing His will. And instead, this happened. What if it was not Allah who answered? The thought made me physically ill. What if the sign I received was not vindication but condemnation? What if that wind was not a test but an answer? And the answer was, "You are wrong. Stop this. You are hurting people in my name." But if it was not Allah, then who? What force could target prayer mats with that precision? What power could create wind that defied every natural explanation? At the station, they processed us one by one. Photographs, fingerprints, paperwork, bail arrangements. I went through all of it mechanically, my body moving while my mind was trapped back on that highway. An activist next to me in line tried to start a chant, tried to rally our spirits, tried to frame this as persecution. But his voice died out quickly when no one joined him. We were all too shaken. We all knew something had happened that we could not explain away. They set my bail, and my roommate came to pick me up just after midnight. He was excited, practically vibrating with energy as I got into his car. "You are a hero," he said. "Social media is blowing up. Everyone is talking about what you did. You are going to be famous." And I said nothing. I just stared out the window as he drove, watching the street lights pass by, unable to form words that would make him understand. When we got back to the apartment, it was full of fellow activists celebrating like we had won some great victory. They were planning the next protest, talking about how much attention we had gotten, analyzing the media coverage with glee, and they looked at me like I was supposed to join the celebration, like I was supposed to be proud. But all I could think about was that mother's face, that sick child, that impossible wind. I went straight to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I could hear them outside, laughing and planning and celebrating, and I lay down on my bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. I did not sleep, could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that wind again, felt my prayer mat being ripped away, felt that crushing certainty that I had done something terribly, irreversibly wrong. And for the first time in my life, I could not pray. I tried. I got up at dawn when I heard the call to Fajr from my phone. I looked at my prayer mat rolled up in the corner where I had left it, and I could not bring myself to touch it, could not bring myself to kneel, could not bring myself to speak to Allah because I did not know if He was even listening, or worse, I did not know if the one I had been praying to all my life was really God at all. The days after the highway protest blurred together into one long nightmare that I could not wake up from. I could not sleep for more than 2 hours at a time before the dreams would start. In every dream, I was back on that highway, feeling the wind, watching my prayer mat tumble away, hearing that question over and over, "What are you doing?" I would wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, my heart racing like I had been running for miles. I could not eat either. Everything tasted like ash in my mouth. My roommates would make food and offer it to me, and I would take a few bites just to stop them from asking questions, but I could barely swallow. My body was rejecting everything because my mind was in complete chaos. I lost 12 pounds in the first week alone. My prayer mat stayed rolled up in the corner of my bedroom exactly where I had left it. Every morning when the call to Fajr sounded from my phone, I would look at that mat and feel my chest tighten with panic. I could not bring myself to touch it, let alone kneel on it. The one time I tried, the second my fingers made contact with the fabric, I felt that wind again like a phantom sensation, and I jerked my hand back, like I had been burned. Meanwhile, my roommates and friends were treating me like some kind of hero. They called me a warrior, a martyr for the cause. Social media was exploding with posts about our protest. Half the internet was praising us for our courage and conviction. The other half was condemning us as terrorists and extremists, and I was caught in the middle, unable to feel anything except this crushing weight of guilt and confusion. They kept congratulating me, and I felt like a fraud, like I was wearing a mask that was slowly suffocating me. Because they did not see it, they did not feel what I felt on that highway. They did not understand that something impossible had happened, something that shattered every certainty I had built my life on, and I could not tell them because I did not even understand it myself. I started obsessively reading the news coverage of our protest, every article, every comment, every piece of footage from that day. And that is when I learned the full consequences of what we had done. There was a man who missed his father's final moments before he died in the hospital because he was trapped in our traffic jam. A woman went into premature labor and her baby was born in an ambulance stuck in the gridlock we created. An ambulance was delayed reaching a heart attack victim, and the patient survived but suffered permanent complications because treatment came too late. Each story was a knife stabbing into my chest. Each life we disrupted, each person we hurt, each consequence of our righteous statement. And my friends kept telling me not to read it, that these people were lying, exaggerating, trying to break my spirit. But I knew they were not lying. I knew because I had seen their faces on that highway. I had seen the mother begging me to move. I had seen the terror and desperation that was real and raw and completely my fault. Have you ever convinced yourself that you were doing the right thing, only to discover you were actually causing terrible harm? Have you ever been so certain of your righteousness that you could not see the suffering you were creating? That was me. That was exactly who I had become. And the realization was destroying me from the inside out. 1 week after the protest, I was still unable to pray normally. I would try to prostrate and my hands would start shaking. I would try to recite the familiar Arabic words and they would die in my throat. And every single time, I would see my prayer mat sliding away from me in that impossible wind. I kept asking myself the same question over and over until it became a mantra of madness. Why would Allah humiliate us like that if we were doing His will? I started researching obsessively. Freak winds, weather phenomena, meteorological anomalies, anything that could explain what happened. I read scientific articles until my eyes burned. I watched videos of tornadoes and microbursts and dust devils. And nothing matched. Nothing came close to explaining the specificity of what occurred on that highway. The wind had targeted our prayer mats and nothing else. It had come from nowhere and disappeared just as suddenly. It had defied every natural explanation I could find. Late one night, sitting alone in my room with my laptop casting a pale glow on my face, I let myself think the thought I had been avoiding for 7 days. What if it was not Allah? What if that wind was not from the God I had been praying to my entire life? And if it was not from Allah, then where did it come from? What other power could do something like that? The questions terrified me because I knew where they were leading and I was not ready to go there. But I also knew I could not live like this anymore. I could not keep pretending everything was fine while my entire worldview crumbled around me. I needed answers. I needed to understand. And most of all, I needed to try to make things right with the people I had hurt. I decided I would apologize to the victims of our protest. I went through all the news coverage and identified people who had been willing to speak publicly about how the blockade affected them. I made a list of names and started trying to find contact information. My friends warned me not to do it. They said I was capitulating to our enemies, that I was betraying the cause, that apologizing would make us look weak. But I did not care anymore what they thought, because I knew the truth that they could not see. We did not do something righteous on that highway. We did something cruel and selfish and destructive, and whether they wanted to admit it or not, I had to try to make it right. The first person I tried to reach was the mother with the sick child. I had seen her interviewed on the local news, talking about how terrified she was, how her son needed immediate medical attention, and we had blocked her from getting help. I found her through the news station and left a voicemail that was barely coherent because my voice kept breaking. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I almost killed your son, and I need you to know that I am sorry. She called me back the same day. I almost did not answer when I saw the unknown number on my screen because I thought it might be a reporter or someone wanting to yell at me. But something made me pick up, and when I heard her voice on the other end, calm and steady, I almost dropped the phone. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. She said she would bring her son so I could see that he was okay now. And as I drove to that meeting, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I had to pull over twice because I thought I was going to be sick. I had no idea that this meeting was about to change the entire trajectory of my life. I had no idea that this woman I had wronged so terribly was about to introduce me to a truth I had been running from my whole life. I walked into that coffee shop feeling like I was heading to my own execution. My hands were shaking so badly I had to shove them into my pockets to hide it. The mother was already there, sitting at a corner table with her son beside her. He looked healthy, alert, completely recovered. And somehow that made my guilt even worse because I realized how close I had come to being responsible for something unforgivable. I sat down across from them, and the words came tumbling out before I could stop them. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. I almost killed your son, and I was so convinced I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong, and I do not know how to make this right, and I am just so sorry. My voice was breaking, cracking, barely holding together. I could feel tears burning in my eyes, and I tried to blink them back, but they came anyway. And then she said something that stopped my spiraling apology mid-sentence. She looked at me with these calm, clear eyes and said, "I forgive you," just like that. 3 words that hit me harder than any curse or condemnation could have. I sat there stunned into complete silence, unable to process what I had just heard. How could she forgive me? I had put her child's life in danger. I had caused her terror and suffering. I deserved her hatred, not her forgiveness. She explained that she was a Christian, that her faith required her to forgive those who wronged her, even when it was hard, even when the hurt was deep. And then she said something that made my blood run cold and my heart race at the same time. She said, "I prayed for you on that highway. While I was trapped in my car, terrified for my son, I prayed that Jesus would open your eyes. I prayed that he would stop you before you hurt more people or destroyed your own soul. I could not speak, could not breathe, because the pieces were suddenly falling into place in a way that terrified me. The wind, the impossible targeted wind that had destroyed our protest. Could it have been an answer to her prayer? Could it have been Jesus, not Allah, who stopped us on that highway? The thought was too big, too dangerous, too world-shattering to fully accept. But I could not shake it either. She started telling me about Jesus, not in a pushy way, not trying to convert me aggressively, just sharing what she believed. She told me that Jesus was not just a prophet, like I had been taught in Islam, but the actual Son of God, that he died on a cross to pay for the sins of humanity, including mine, that he rose from the dead 3 days later, proving his divinity and his power over death itself, and that he loved me enough to physically intervene in my life to stop me from destroying myself and others. She said something I will never forget. She looked me right in the eyes and said, "Jesus did not send that wind to punish you. He sent it to save you, to wake you up before you went too far down a path you could not come back from. That is what love does. It intervenes. Even when the intervention is uncomfortable, or frightening, or completely disrupts what you thought you knew." Before I left that coffee shop, she gave me her pastor's phone number. She said he would be willing to talk with me, to answer any questions I had, to help me understand what had really happened on that highway. I took the number, but I did not commit to calling. I was not ready. I was standing on the edge of a cliff looking down into an abyss, and I was terrified of what would happen if I jumped, but I could not stop thinking about what she had said. Over the next 3 weeks, I started secretly researching Christianity. I would wait until my roommates were asleep or out of the apartment. Then I would pull up websites and videos and articles comparing the Bible to the Quran. I watched testimony after testimony of former Muslims who had converted to Christianity. I read apologetics defending the resurrection of Jesus. I studied the historical evidence for Christ's divinity, and the more I researched, the more the evidence mounted. The eyewitness accounts of Jesus' resurrection, the transformation of the disciples from terrified deserters to bold martyrs, the explosion of the early church despite brutal persecution, the prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled with impossible precision, the logical consistency of grace versus works-based salvation. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction, and I was fighting it with everything I had, because accepting it meant losing everything I knew. I am asking you right now, have you ever been so sure of something, only to realize you were completely wrong? Have you ever built your entire identity on a foundation, only to discover that foundation was sand? That was me. Every single day for 3 weeks I felt my certainty crumbling, while something new and terrifying tried to take its place. and I could not tell anyone, not my family, not my friends, not my community, because I knew what the consequences would be. The internal war was destroying me. I would lie awake at night, my mind racing with questions and doubts and fears. If I converted to Christianity, I would lose my family. They would disown me, cut me off completely. I would lose my friends, my community, my entire support system. I would become an apostate, one of the worst things a Muslim can be. Some former Muslims are killed by their own families for converting. Was I ready to risk that? Was I ready to give up everything for a truth I was still trying to fully understand? But I also could not deny what I had experienced on that highway. The wind, the impossible targeted wind that had answered a Christian woman's prayer and destroyed our Muslim protest. I kept coming back to that moment over and over. The precision of it, the power of it, the way my prayer mat had been ripped from under me like God Himself was saying, "Stop this, you are wrong. Look at me instead." Late one night in early October, I was alone in my room reading the Gospel of John on my laptop. I got to chapter 3, verse 16. "For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have eternal life." And something broke open inside my chest. I realized that everything I had been doing, all my activism and protests and public prayers, was me trying to earn God's favor, trying to prove I was good enough, devoted enough, righteous enough. But Jesus was offering something completely different. Not a religion of earning, but a relationship of grace. After weeks of study and prayer and wrestling with the truth, I finally made my choice. It was October 15th, 2 in the morning, and I could not sleep because the decision was burning inside me like a fire. I got out of bed and I knelt on my bedroom floor, not on my prayer mat, just on the carpet, and I prayed differently than I had ever prayed in my entire life. "Jesus, if you are real," I said out loud in the darkness of my room, "if you were the one who stopped me on that highway, if you love me enough to save me from myself, then forgive me. Forgive me for everything, for hurting people in the name of religion, for being so blind and so arrogant, for rejecting you my whole life. Save me, show me the truth. I believe you are Lord." And I felt it. This overwhelming sense of peace that was completely different from anything I had experienced in Islam. Not fear, not obligation, not the pressure to perform, just peace. Like I had been carrying 1,000-pound weight my entire life, and it had just been lifted off my shoulders. Like I had been drowning and someone had just pulled me to the surface and I could finally breathe. I knew in that moment, with absolute certainty, that Jesus was real, that He was Lord, that He had been pursuing me my whole life, and I had finally stopped running. The next morning I called the pastor. We met multiple times over the next 2 weeks, and I asked him every hard question I could think of, about the Trinity, about salvation, about whether the Bible had been corrupted like I was taught, about Islam and whether good Muslims could go to heaven. He was patient with every question, never pushy, always pointing me back to Scripture and letting me wrestle with the truth for myself. And then came the hardest part, telling my family. I drove to my parents' house on a Friday evening, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. My mother and father were sitting on the couch when I walked in. I sat down across from them, and I said the words that I knew would destroy them. I have converted to Christianity. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the only way to salvation. My mother's face crumpled immediately. She started crying, deep wrenching sobs that tore my heart to pieces. My father stood up, his face twisted with rage and grief. He pointed at the door and said, "Get out! You are not my son. You have betrayed your family, your faith, your people. Get out of my house and do not come back." My siblings were called. All of them turned against me except my younger sister, who later reached out in secret to tell me she was praying for me, even though she did not understand my choice. It cost me everything. My family cut me off. My friends blocked me on every platform. People in my community called me a traitor, an apostate, a tool of Western imperialism. I received death threats. I lost my job because my employer was Muslim and could not tolerate having an apostate on staff. Everything I had built my identity on was stripped away in a matter of weeks, and it was worth it. Every single loss was worth it, because I had found the truth. I was baptized in the Mother's Church, the woman from the highway whose prayer had started this whole journey. Her family welcomed me like I was one of their own. I started attending Bible studies and joining a small group and learning what it meant to follow Jesus, not out of obligation, but out of love and gratitude. I got a job at a Christian nonprofit that helps Muslim seekers explore Christianity. I use my testimony to help others who are going through the same struggle I went through. I tell them, I know what you are risking. I know what it costs. And I am here to tell you that Jesus is worth it, that the peace and freedom and grace you find in Him is worth every sacrifice. My younger sister recently reached out to me. She is asking questions about Jesus, reading the Bible in secret, wrestling with the same doubts I wrestled with. And I am walking with her through it, praying for her, trusting that the same Jesus who stopped me on a highway can reach her too. Look at your own life right now. What are you so convinced of that you would block a highway for it? What belief are you clinging to so tightly that you cannot hear God calling you in a different direction? Maybe you are blocking your own highway right now. Maybe you are so certain you are right that you cannot see the suffering you are causing or the truth you are rejecting. That wind on the highway was Jesus saying, stop, look at me, know me. And I am telling you this story because maybe you need to hear the same thing. Do not wait for your prayer mat to be ripped out from under you. Do not wait for a crisis to force you to examine what you believe. Come to Jesus now, while there is still time, while your heart is still open to hearing His voice. My name is Naji. I blocked a highway to pray to Allah, convinced I was serving God, and Jesus Christ blocked my path to hell and showed me the truth. This is my testimony, this is my life, and I pray to Jesus, the one true God, that my story reaches someone who needs to hear it today.